Hello. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about supplies. If you could see my art desk right now, you would see what a crazy place it is. I've got out all of my watercolour supplies really, so that I can talk you through some of them. What I'm going to start with are all of these kind of pens and pencils that I use. I'll move those out of the way so you can see. So, if I want to draw, I tend to use one of these. It's a Pentel Graph Gear 1000 0.3mm mechanical pencil. A little bit like a biro. You can see that when you press down on the top, the lead comes out. Press on the clip, the lead goes back. It means that the end lead doesn't get broken off and snapped and wasted when you're travelling around, which I really like. This one is HB. I do have another one that is a 2B. You have little leads that go in there. You can get a very fine line with them. I really like them. They are my favourite. And I'm just struggling to get this part back in because I have slightly broken it. So I will fix that in a moment. I just need to unbend the wire. So alongside that, when I'm doing work with pencils, I will use these two bits of kit. This is a tortillon that I use for blending. And these are basically some soft leaded pencils I've got from HB, 2B, 4B, 6B, 7B and 8B. These particular ones are Mars Lumograph Black that I am trying out. And the idea is that where graphite can be quite shiny, these are not. The other thing that obviously I use is going to be an eraser. So I've just gone with these bog standard kind of white erasers. It's the Billo one. And then I've got this, which is a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. It's got quite a fine little bit there, so I can get into tricky little bits and just erase the bit that I want to without damaging the watercolour paper too much. Because when you erase on watercolour paper, you damage the paper a little bit and it can make it react more differently to the watercolour. Then go-to pens that I use all of the time are probably these three. This is a white gel pen. Now my normal one is a Signo Uniball. It looks a little bit different to this one, but it's a white Signo Uniball. And then the other two that I use are paint pens, Posca paint pens. And this one will re-wet and will smudge. Once these are dry, they won't move, which is fantastic. And I've got those in 0.7 and 1. Or 0.7 pin and 0.7 bullet shape, I think, actually, is what those two are. So they're when I need to add any white. The rest of these are pens and pencils that I sometimes use. This is a lovely black pen. It's another Uniball. It's a fine and it's black. It gives you a lovely rich black line. However, if you wet it, it will smudge everywhere. So although I use it sometimes, it would be a very last step. More often, what I actually use when I need black lines are these. They are Staedtler fine liner pens. You get them in the set, and in your set you get one of each size. So you get a 0.5, a 0.1, I think a 0.2 and a 0.3, and then a 0.5 and a 0.8. As you can see, I've got varying combinations of pens that are from the two sets when I needed to replace them to get one of them, and I just use what's there. That's what I use. Once these are dry, especially if you heat them with a heat gun, I have not found that they react with water at all, but they do need a little bit of time to properly dry. If you try and use them 10 minutes after, when they feel dry, if you put your finger on them, you know, there's no ink coming off, they can still bleed. So if I want to work quickly with these, I'll use them and then I'll heat dry them with my heat gun. The last black pen that I've got is this one. It's a Sakura glaze pen. When you're using these, they have like a little blob on the end, so you pull the blob off and then you'll get a line, and you can see that it's really smudgy. Takes a while to dry, but you get this fantastic shiny line that once it's dry doesn't move. I've then got paint pens, and I have these in a rainbow colours, same as the white ones but in different colours. I've got a selection of everything literally going through the rainbow, from like reds, yellows, oranges, light greens, blues, purples, browns, and this pink that I really like. I've got two sorts of crayons. I've got these sorts which are Inktense. These give really rich, vibrant kind of colours, and when you wet them they will move, but when they dry they won't re-wet, so you get kind of one chance to wet them. I also have these, and these are Faber-Castell Aquarelle. Now these are watercolour pencils, so these will re-wet. They tend to be much paler, much subtler colours. They are great for adding little bits of detail. They are great to use to write and to wet, but they don't give like a rich, vibrant, intense kind of colour when they're wet. And then the last three kind of little groups I've got, I have these are called Tombow. Now, on one end of your Tombow there is a brush pen. On the other end there is a bullet. So you've got kind of fine and filling. These will wet and they'll move around like watercolours, and they're quite fun to play with. I really quite like those. This is a very similar thing, but it's by Faber-Castell, and this one has a much firmer kind of brush tip, and then on the other end it has a much thicker bullet tip. Now price wise, I think these are around £3 and these are around £5. I have one of these because I got one to try and I quite like it, but it's not that dissimilar from Tombow for me. And then the other thing that I do find I use are these. These are Signo Uniball, and they come in, you get them in white obviously, you get them in black and silver, gold and silver rather, and I really like using the gold and silver ones. Again, they will re-wet and they will smudge, so you have to be careful of that. That's pretty much all of the pens and most of the pencils, except for these. These are called Neocolor 2s, and they look a lot like a wax crayon, and when they go on, that is what they are like. You can smudge them with your finger and get some really cool effects, but you can also wet them, and when you wet them they move around just like a watercolour paint, and as long as the paper's dry when you put them on, they don't leave a residue behind, they don't leave a line. They're quite good like that, and you can go back in and re-wet them, and they're quite fun to use, especially if you're covering kind of large areas. Another thing that I quite like to use and have is this. This is Daler Rowney. It's a white acrylic ink. Now once it's dry it won't move, but before it's dry it moves around just like a watercolour ink does. It gives you really nice white. You can paint with a brush. I tend to keep some specific brushes for inks that I use. You can use it with a dip pen. I have a few different kinds of dip pen with drawing nibs on generally that I use, which are these. And I also use, this has got, it's not actually got Winsor & Newton ink in it. This is an old pot, and in here I've got Indian ink. I put a little bit in a pot because otherwise I've got this big bottle, which is no good really for dipping your dip pen into or a brush into. I do have other acrylic inks, but these are the ones that I use. So next up I've got a multitude of brushes. Now these are two sorts of brushes. I don't use them a lot, but I do use them sometimes. These are what's called water brushes, and you can see there that they have a reservoir that holds water, so they're really great for if you're going out and about and you don't have a water pot. And that's when I tend to use these quite a lot. And you give a squeeze and the water will come down the brush and it will get wet. And sometimes with this one, mine are a bit older, they're a bit temperamental, so it takes a while for it to get wet, but eventually it kind of will. And they come in different sizes. You can see that one's much finer, and that one you can see is getting a little bit wet there. And you can get them as flat brushes. You can get them as these that are kind of round brushes that kind of have a pointed round shape, and they're quite useful for that. And then these brushes, which are older brushes, these are the ones I use for ink. So I've got a variety of different sizes and shapes, and they all live together in their little elastic band, so that if I need them, I don't have to hunt through the other brushes and they don't get mixed up. Because getting mixed up with my proper brushes is not good. And here I have the vast majority of my brushes that I use all of the time. I'm just going to plop them all out there for you and we'll go through them one by one. This one is a number 6 mop brush. It holds a lot of water, and you can see it's kind of soft and it's got kind of a moppy shape to it. When you wet it, it gets really, really wet. It can be great for wetting wet, and I really enjoy using it. This is a relatively small mop brush, I suppose. Then next to my biggish brushes I have, this is called a flat brush. This is a 3/4 inch flat brush, so fairly big. I don't have very many flat brushes in my collection that I use all of the time, but I do have them hanging around. In that same kind of style, you've got this, which is a round. This is a number 10 round. And somewhere I've got, I think, a number 6. No, a number 8. This is a 10 and an 8 round. And then this gorgeous looking guy, it's called a cat's tongue, and it's a 3/4 inch cat's tongue, so it's quite big. But I don't use it a lot, but I do sometimes use it to play with. Then other brushes that we've got in here, I've actually got a set of these brushes that have the curved kind of end to them in a whole range of sizes over here, and I bought them just to see if I would like this particular shape. And I do, they're quite fun to use. What I found with these particular brushes is, if you can see this one that I'd used, it kind of split. Its bristles came apart a little bit, so they're great to try out, and I do like the shape. I just need to decide which size I really like, and then I will get a slightly better quality one in that size for me. I also have in here these white brushes, are the ones I use most for fine detailing, and the one that I tend to use an awful lot is this one. Now the sizes of brushes, kind of if they're whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 would be the biggest, 1 would be the littlest. 0 is smaller than a 1. 00, smaller than a 0. 000, smaller than both of those. And then you get ones that look a bit like this. This has on it, it has 10O, and that's really small. And then if you look here, this one, if you see those two next to each other, this one is a 4O, and you can see it's bigger. So when you get to these, which is a 10/0, it's telling you this is kind of, this would be 10 zeros in a row. This would be 4 zeros in a row. And so the more zeros in the row, the smaller and finer the brush is. Really great for detail work. I tend to be quite heavy on my brushes, so these Pro Art ones are at a decent price point for how long they tend to last me. And then probably my most used brushes, if I can hunt out the full set. Let's see, there's another one. There's another one. There's another one. I've got another one. I think that's all of them. These are called spotters, and I have a number 5, a number 3, I have a number 1, a 0 and a 000, and they have quite a short amount of bristle, and they're shorter than what is called a round brush, and they hold probably less water, and they are a bit like drawing with paint, and you can be quite fine and quite careful with them, and you can have quite a lot of control, which I like. These 3 are long rounds. If you look at the difference, this is a size 5 brush, and this one's just one size up, a size 6. And you can see just how much longer that is, and it's got a much pointier tip. This is very flexible when it's wet, and you can get lovely loose lines. You can also get really fine detail with these points. And these are Billy Showell brushes. This little lot that are left now, are various brushes that I have hanging around in different sizes. Some that have come with sets that I either haven't used or haven't really gelled with. I've got a fan brush here, which is pretty obvious from its name. And these 2 are rigger brushes. Not a brush I use a lot, but you can see they're very long, and they can become very kind of fine, and you can get really fantastic lines with them. This one is a dagger, I think, rather than a sword liner. It might be a sword liner. I'm just having a little look. Yeah, it's a sword liner. It's kind of longer than an angled flat. And I always get sword liners and daggers a little bit confused, but you can see that it's kind of angled, and it comes to quite a thin, flexible point. Now, if you have a look here, just grab these out. That's like a much bigger version and longer version, and that is a sword liner. And you can see the similarity in the shape there. So this one is, it's just a small, and this one is a number 6. So as you can see in the different brands of brushes, sometimes the sizes are not all that comparable. So often when I go on websites, I like to have a look and see if they've got the measurement down of how long this bit is and how wide this bit is. And I'll sit with my bit of paper and figure that out. These 3 brushes are really basic quality brushes that I use to lift paint out of my palette, because if you imagine you're going round and round and round and round, that can be quite damaging to your brush end. So when you're picking paint up from your palette, I tend to use these. They're much cheaper, they're much kind of more workhorsey. They're also the ones that I use when I am painting with younger kids, because they're quite tolerant and quite sturdy. So they live in there too. Other brushes include things like this, which is called a deer's foot stippler. This, which is called an angled flat. This has got an awesome name that I always forget. Something like it's a foliage brush, but I don't know if that's what it's called. I don't know if you can see well enough, but when you have a good look at the bristles here, you can see that some are long, and then there's a kind of bigger body of the brush that's much shorter where the water would be held. You get some great kind of grassy kind of effects from those. This is a smaller flat brush. This is a small angled flat. This is a rigger brush. This is a number 6 round. So smaller than the rounds that I have in my main tub. I've also got some kind of workhorsey brushes there for picking up colour. And then another thing that I tend to have is a toothbrush. And it's not pretty, and you wouldn't want to clean your teeth with it, but if you want to flick watery paint, and you can dip in and get some great speckles like that, which I really enjoy. So that's pretty much the brushes that I have around and that I use a lot in my painting. clearing a little bit of space. So these are some of the other things that I use. White or pastel I use for resist work. Same as masking fluid. And with this is blue, so it dries blue so you can see it. It will dry waterproof, you can paint over it, and then you can kind of peel it off at the end, and you can apply that with a brush. It ruins brushes. A rubber tipped kind of tool. I've got a metal tool that I do it, and you could theoretically do it with a dip pen if you washed it off really quickly. You can do it with a stick. So I tend to keep specific brushes that I'm going to use for that. This is 90%, 91% alcohol, and this is used for kind of splattering and creating effects. I've also got this, which is called granulating medium. This, which is a lift aid medium. Now, I haven't got on very well with this particular brand. I didn't find that it lifted. I didn't find that I could draw with pencil onto a surface I'd paint with it and the pencil would come off. The paint came off beautifully, but the pencil didn't, and I wanted to use it when I was doing kind of big complex drawings so that if I made a mistake I could lift the paint off, but the pencil just seemed to really darken up and was too much. I've also got this, which is just called Watercolor medium, and it helps to add shine and gloss. I've got a few mediums. You can get iridescent medium as well, which adds like an iridescent shine to paint and kind of gives it a sparkly quality. Making a little bit of space here. I've then got salt. This is table salt, fine salt. I also have sea salt, which is kind of more granular. This is actually in a grinder, and if I shake it, I can get the big bits to just come out. So I get those bigger bits of kind of sea salt, and if I grind it up, I can get a finer version of the sea salt, and they do behave differently. I also have two sorts of masking tape. This is a fine one, and this is just a wide one. They're both low tack. They both came from Amazon. This one's a Scotch one, and they've obviously taken a big roll and cut it into little bits. This is kind of about 6mm wide, so it's quite fine. Some people are really good. They use like a craft knife or a Stanley knife or something, and they slice down here and make these beautiful, you know, very straight strips. I am not good at doing straight, so I tend to buy mine at the thickness I need. I always have a little bit of it's an old plastic credit cardy type thing, and that's for scraping salt off once it's dry. And the last kind of things I have before we get to the paints and the palettey bits are these. These are watercolour grounds. You can paint them onto any surface so it will behave more like watercolour. I've got transparent and I've got white. It also comes in gold and possibly black, I think. I've used them on things like wood and over the top of acrylics. Black gesso. Sometimes I use black gesso. I've got this, which is a fixative, and it actually does fix watercolours so they won't re-wet, about 3 or 4 layers and lots of drying time in between them. I also use it a lot for when I'm using charcoal on my watercolour, so I can fix the charcoal so that that's not going to smudge and go everywhere. And then the last thing in these kind of things is this, my little pot of brush cleaning soap. It comes with its instructions, and it's a really good idea to use it on your brushes. All of my brushes that I've just shown you really need me to go in and do this because it helps to clean them, it helps to preserve their shape and kind of condition and look after their bristles. So, the next thing then are palettes. I have these plastic palettes. They're quite good, but as you can see, they discolour, so it can be a bit tricky to see what colour your paint is in them. And one of the things that you can use instead of a plastic palette is a porcelain one. Now, the porcelain palettes that I found were very, very, very expensive, so I found a plate in Tesco's, and I used that. It's white, it wipes off, cleans off really well, and it doesn't stain, so you always get a good idea of what your colours are going to look like. That kind of sits next to me. Then we have paints. Now first I'm going to show you the paints that I get out to use if I want to. I love these metallic paints. They're Prima Metallic Accents, and you can see they've had quite a bit of use, a really nice range of colours, and they are super shimmery, really creamy and lovely, and they come as hard circular pans. So as with all kind of pan paints, you need to wet them before you use them. Some people spray theirs. I never got into the habit of doing that. I think because some of my paints were Sennelier paints that had been given to me that I'd had filled up, and also a couple of my paints were very full to the top, and if I sprayed them they would get so soft that the paint would kind of drip everywhere and would make my palette really messy, and they would go into the other paints. So I tend to just wet the individual ones that I want to use with a wet brush and then leave it for a little bit so that the water can kind of work its way in. These are not technically watercolours, they're gouaches. It's a wonderful word, you should try saying it, gouache. And they come in tubes. These are more opaque, probably more pigmented than watercolours. They are less transparent and less translucent. You can use them over the top of things in a way that you couldn't with watercolours. For instance, you could try using them over, say, a jelly print or something like that, and they would work. And you could paint on stones with them, which is actually what I generally use this set for. And then there are these gorgeous, gorgeous paints that I really like. These are Kuretake paints, and they come like this in their box. I'm just going to get the plastic off. And each of these is a little paint palette. You can buy single replacements, as I need to do for this lemony yellow. They come with numbers. They're organised kind of in a good order. They are really vibrant, really kind of bright, and there's a lovely kind of transparency to them. They're not, there's only, these two are quite opaque, but other than that the rest of them aren't, so I really like those. They're a great set. And then I have this that I made. Okay, so it holds all of my paints, and they're arranged in order kind of from lightest yellow there, and it goes round into oranges as kind of a graduating cycle, and then it comes up here and goes into blues, into greens, and then I've got the kind of purples and metallics and all those kind of things arranged in here so that I can get to them. Each of them tends to be labelled. If it's got this on, that means it's a single pigment. It has the name on. It also has a number on it. Now the number matches up to my swatches, so that if the name wears off, I'd find the yellow swatches, I'd find 93, which I think that one was, and it would tell me, yeah, that's DS Hansa Yellow Medium. It looks like that. It tells me if it's a single pigment. I've got the pigment colour on the front, and it gives me some of the information on the back, like it doesn't granulate, it's semi-transparent, and it's low staining. If I were to pick another colour that I've actually done the back of, there's some that say they're semi-transparent, some will say they're granulating, and so that's quite useful. And then here, in this little row here, these are my Golden QOR watercolours. They behave differently, they play differently, and they dry differently. They've got a lot of similarities to acrylic. They're very intensely pigmented, so if I want to create translucent effects, I need to use them with lots more water than I might with these. They are great fun, but I don't have them in with my main paints for that reason. And then these are all fine tech metallics, and they are beautiful. Again, they do play differently. I only have those three, so they just fit in the middle. And those are kind of all of my paints. Now the vast majority of these paints are tubes that I fill into the pan.